Align is a podcast for the awakened soul, where we get real on all things spirituality and navigating the human experience. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to today's podcast episode, where we are going to talk about finding forgiveness for absent parents. But before we dive in, I want to encourage you to think about the definition of an absent parent, because while it can certainly mean that they were or are physically absent from your life, it can also mean that they were physically present, but mentally or emotionally absent from your life. And even if you didn't have a quote unquote absent parent, I still encourage you to stick around, because most of us are walking around in this human experience with some type of emotional baggage from our childhood. And those unhealed wounds from the past are what are limiting our realities right now. If this content resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so that you are always notified when we upload a new episode or healing to the platform. And now it is time to meet our guest for today. To help guide us through this discussion, we have Ashley Thorns with us. A little bit of background about Ashley. She is a certified spiritual coach, intuitive energy healer, and hypnotherapist. And Ashley specializes in tarot readings, sound bowl, chakra healing, and being freaking fabulous. I want to add that Ashley is one of the most magnetic humans that I've ever had the honor of meeting. And I know that all of you are going to feel that today too. Ashley, thank you for bringing this topic to me and for being here. I'm so excited to be spending this time together.
Yes, I'm excited too. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I know that this topic is super close to your heart, because when we first started working together, which by the way was all the way back in December 2022. Did you realize that?
Yeah, I can't believe it's been so long.
I had to go look and I was like, nah, there's no way.
Yes.
But I know that when you and I first met all the way back then, this was one of the first things that you had shared with me and we talked about together. Yeah. So before you and I go down the rabbit hole that we are about to go down today, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and also what made you feel called to talk about this specific topic?
So, of course, my name is Ashley. I'm 34 years old. I am a Sagittarius, so definitely fiery and like to have fun.
Is that rising, by the way, or sun sign?
That's my sun sign. My rising sign is Cancer, of course.
Ooh, watery and emotional.
Yes. But it's crazy because my moon sign is an Aries. So I'm like a little bit more fiery than I am. But I'm all like emotional to a T. It's so crazy.
I am an Aries moon as well. And
nice.
So not to take us down a different rabbit hole, 4-hour rabbit hole, but this ties so much into what we're going to talk about today. And I'll put that plug in at the end if I don't forget. So continue.
Okay, cool. I want to say I started my spiritual and healing journey back in like 2011, 2012. I was just graduating from college and I embarked on the spiritual journey. And since then I've had a couple of awakenings. I've had I've had a handful, but I think my most latest one was joining the Ascension Academy with you, Crystal, and that it opened my eyes and my ears and my heart and my soul to like a new level of, this journey. So now I'm doing spiritual healing and, trying to help people heal and, teaching them how to heal so they can heal other people too, because that's really what the world needs right now.
Absolutely. By the way, I didn't realize that you started your spiritual journey so young.
I was young. I was about 21, 22 years old when I started.
Wow.
And it was actually I had a handful of friends in college that embarked on the journey. We went through the journey together. And so I kind of consider them my soulmates, because it's like I've never met anybody like any people like this that actually get what's going on and like get what, get me, down to the core. So, and I'm still in, good communication with them today. So yeah, I started pretty early.
I am sure that there are several soul contracts hidden in that, right? Where you all agreed to come upon one another at that time so that you could awaken each other and go through
Yeah,
that
it was
experience.
amazing, an amazing time in my life. Like I always think of that time. It's easy for me to remember when my spiritual journey started because of them and because of like the time in my life that it happened, but definitely.
That's beautiful. And so why this topic?
So, like you said, when we first started working together, it was one of the first topics that we discussed that kind of was, I was confused about it because I remember my father not being in my life, but I also remember it not being so traumatizing. And I remember you telling me that, trauma isn't necessarily this like horrific event, it could be a very emotional event that happens. And I remember you telling me that it may not have been his absence that was triggering, but more so his inaction. And that stuck with me. And I remember healing through that. And of course, I still am because it's still fresh to me. But my father just recently passed away in January. And it brought up so many emotions for me because I remember forgiving him during the program, but not really having that conversation with him. And so when he passed away, I felt like it was just so many like unspoken conversations that we didn't have, that we didn't get to have. But I was just grateful that I was able to forgive him and realize why I picked him as my father, in this lifetime. So I figured, I was like, well, let's hop on Crystal's podcast and talk about this since it's so fresh.
There is so much deep stuff that you just mentioned. And, a couple of things that I want to point out. So first, you talked about how you chose him. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of consciousness and self-awareness to get to that point, right? Where we can look at the pain that we've experienced or situations that have really molded our lives and have potentially created trauma, and to be able to say, I chose that. So do you mind me asking, what helped you get to that level of spiritual understanding where you were able to say, okay, there's a spiritual reason behind this, and then to also be able to find the purpose behind your relationship with him?
Honestly, if I hadn't have attended like the Ascension Academy, I wouldn't have even known that I chose him at all. Like I didn't know. You really opened my eyes to that. And I remember first coming across that fact, like you actually chose, everyone in your life. You're from your mother to your siblings to your father, like you chose them before you were even born. And at first I had a hard time accepting that because I'm like, why would I choose somebody who didn't, choose me, but getting past that, like that ego mind base of, like, like, why would I do that? It really helped me to understand that, I chose him to sort of show myself how to show up for myself in this lifetime. And it did take a lot of just healing and a lot of meditation and, just communication with my higher self and my higher power, just to understand that it was okay. Because once I realized and once I accepted that, okay, I chose him and I accepted why I chose him, it made it easier to swallow and it made it easier to forgive him as well. It was a very emotional time. I remember sitting back and just asking myself, like, why did I choose him to be my father? And I remember just, getting into my heart space and getting closer and closer to my higher self. And like those answers just started coming out of nowhere. And I'm like writing them down and I'm just crying like, oh my gosh, like this is why I get it. And so I feel more appreciative that he wasn't in my life because it did show me how I should show up for myself more or better.
There's always purpose in the pain, right? And that I really feel like was the biggest turning point for me as well in my journey. When I went through some of the things that I went through, was everything shifted when I started to take that mindset of there's purpose in this, there's a lesson in this, there's
Absolutely.
something on the karmic level that I'm supposed to be getting out of this. And when I uncover that, and when I heal it and when I master it, I'm going to move on. My soul is going to advance and the human experience is going to get so freaking good.
Yeah, it felt so
Right?
good. It felt so like freeing because like I told you, I didn't really find the trauma in him not being in my life because my mom just raised us like beautifully. Like we never had to want for anything. I never really realized that he was supposed to be in my life until I got a little bit older and went to school and I saw like my friends with their family. I'm like, oh, I guess I am supposed to have a dad. But
That's
it
kind of
wasn't like a
normal.
traumatizing thing. It wasn't like, where is my dad and why doesn't he love me? And if it was, I feel like it was very like it wasn't like a major impact in my life, honestly. So I had to really understand like, well, if I know that there's something that is affecting me emotionally about him not being in my life, but I'm not sure if it was his absence more so than his inaction to like not at any point in his life, jump on board and be like, okay, well, you know what, let's build a relationship, that kind of thing. So
Right.
yeah, it was definitely freeing for sure.
You have such an interesting perspective on it because I personally have never encountered the physical absence, but absolutely the emotional absence was the big thing that I dealt with growing up. And oftentimes, when I hear other adults talk about that physical absence, they have a very different perspective of how traumatic it felt like in that moment or how it took their lives down a totally different path because of not having that other parent there, or in some cases, maybe being
Right.
adopted and not having either biological parent. So, I'm just curious, what was that big turning point for you when you started to realize, like, hey, maybe this isn't quote unquote normal,
Normal.
that my dad's not in my life?
I think so. I, like you said, I do have a different perspective on it because I've heard plenty of stories where people are like, I waited for my dad to come and he just never came. I've never had, I never had that happen to me per se, but I do remember in high school for my graduation, he had reached out beforehand and he was like, hey, I would love to come to your graduation. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, and I had a huge graduation class, so we only got about 5 to 6 tickets per family. And I remember turning people down because I had to save a ticket for him. And I'm like, my father's coming. They're like, oh, really? And I'm like, yes, I have to save this ticket for him. And they're like, okay. And granted, that was a moment that I was disappointed because he didn't show up, but I didn't realize until after I graduated. So it didn't really have like a crazy effect on my graduation day. I honestly thought he was there the whole time. So I was happy. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to see me accomplish something great. And then after the fact, when, you meet up with your family, you're doing a head count, like, okay, well, and I just realized he wasn't there. That was probably the only moment that I realized like, okay, this isn't good. Like I actually got my hopes up, to see him and to, share that moment with him. And he didn't show up. So I think I want to say like by high school, by the time I graduated high school, I really realized like, okay, this is affecting me, I want to say, I mean, of course, when I was younger in grade school, I would see, sometimes my friends' fathers would pick them up. But again, it didn't feel like I was missing out on anything. I would see it, but I wouldn't be like jealous or like envious, like, oh, I wish I had a dad to pick me up. It just wasn't, I just didn't have, I don't remember having those moments or those thoughts. But definitely high school graduation for sure was like that first big moment where I was like, wow, this is disappointing. So yeah.
Yeah. You're really just hitting it down that what I want all of our listeners to remember is that none of this is a one size fits all, right? So, like, you have this very unique story, and you have clearly, Ashley, always been an incredibly resilient and regulated human to be able to navigate an experience like that and to have still stayed par on your own course and to have still become so awakened and conscious at such a young age and now here be where you are right now. And for others that might have had, an absent parent and didn't stay as regulated, I also want to call out, like, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because I want to validate every single person that can resonate with this discussion
Right.
today. You deserve to be heard and understood because this is hard stuff. But I also just want to commend you for your level of awareness, and healing that you've been
Thank
able to
you. Yeah.
done,
Yeah,
because that
definitely.
is a lot. So I know that you shared when he passed away this most recent January, that is when it started to pull some stuff up for you. What would you say was the biggest thing that came to the surface that you had to work through?
I went through so many different emotions. I had to actually look up grief in the stages because I'm like, why am I going through this? Like, I was
Mm.
really confused. I'm like, why am I crying over this guy who was never in my life? But I feel like I was, so just a backstory, he passed away in like I guess I'll say like a hospice care. So he was by himself. He didn't have anyone near him. So when I found that out, I was really, really hurt. I'm like, nobody deserves to die alone, you know? So that really saddened me. But then I got upset at myself for being sad. It was a lot of different emotions. I'm like, why am I sad? Like, no, you don't need to be sad. But then I honestly wanted to just honor all the emotions and feelings. So I was sad. I was upset. I was upset at myself for being sad, but I was also upset at him for dying before we could even have that conversation, you know? So I went through those emotions. And then I have siblings. Well, I have a sibling on my father's side, and he didn't have a relationship with him either. And I didn't really notice that until me and him got a little bit closer. But I thought for a moment that, like, I'm his only daughter and he has other children he's taking care of, but he wasn't even taking care of his other children either. So it's like, it kind of made me feel better about my situation. It's just like, oh, okay, this is just who he is. But
Like it
yeah, I
wasn't
went through a
specifically against you. It was just his general
right. It's just
behavior, his
him.
character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it made the blow it softened the blow for sure. But when he passed away, I felt like I was sad and I was upset. It was just two contradicting feelings, honestly. And I I wouldn't say I was depressed about it, but I definitely went into like I uh uh what is it? It's not hyper, but
Like
a
hypo.
hypo interaction where it was just like, let me just go to bed early, let me cry in my pillow, like, you know, let me just stay to myself and not really like open up and talk about it. But that was the main emotions and feelings that I went through when
Yeah.
I found out he passed.
Well, I imagine too, at that point, then it's like there's no chance, right? So then you have to almost
Right.
come to terms with and accept that, hey, this person wasn't in my life, my entire life. And
Right.
now that is no longer even an option on my table. Like I'm
Yeah.
never going to have that dad in this human experience.
Yeah, it did. That hit too, but it's crazy because I didn't realize that that was also a feeling that I was feeling until because I posted about it, excuse me. I posted about it on my Instagram story and I was like, "Hey guys, my dad died today. I'm really emotional about it. I don't know why." And I had so many people tell me like it could be the fact that, you missed that opportunity. You guys missed that opportunity. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like I missed the opportunity to have a relationship with him. But I also kind of take accountability for that too, because I feel like there were moments in time where he did try to reach out, but because I didn't trust it, I
Yeah.
didn't, like pursue it further. There was one phone conversation that we had right after my first awakening, when I fresh out of college. I remember him trying to reach out. He was reaching out to all my family and friends on Facebook, trying to get to me. And I'm like, okay, well, let me just have this conversation with him. Like, I need to have the conversation. I feel like I'm a little bit more mature now, and I have like the vocabulary and the knowledge
Mhm.
talk to him. So we had the conversation, and I got my chance to ask him the questions like, why weren't you there? And he gave me his side of the story, and it felt like, questions were answered. But I think more than anything, I wanted a relationship to grow from that, just to, see what would happen. And it didn't happen. So, anytime after that, I was just like, I don't know if I want to, waste any more energy on this connection. Like, if it's not going to be anything, I don't want to get my hopes up. So I do take some accountability for not reaching back out to him when he did try to get in touch with me. But I feel like I just was being cautious and trying to stay safe, I guess you can say.
And that's fair. Right. One of my favorite quotes that I've ever heard is the quote by Oprah when she says, believe people when they show you who they
Who
are.
they are. Yeah.
And so it's such a fine line between forgiveness and also believing people when they show you who they are. And you
Yeah.
had all of these years, I'm assuming like 33, 34 years, right?
Yep.
Well, right around
Mhm.
when he died, but you had all of these years and he had all of these years to show you something different. And by the
Yeah.
way, when I say this, and as you know, Ashley, I'm saying this more for our listeners, like this doesn't mean that this is coming from a low vibrational or ego-led space. You can do both. You can say something from love and recognize like, hey, this person had the chance to make changes and didn't. We can acknowledge that and still simultaneously also say, therefore, I needed to create safety for myself. I needed to put boundaries in place. You know, after he had 3 decades to make changes,
Right.
yeah, like
Right.
I didn't feel like engaging in the conversation. That's not wrong, right?
Right.
That's
Right.
self-love because what's the opposite end of that? The opposite end of that is other people who, like me, were self-sacrificers or engaged in codependency. And they would be the ones that potentially would cling on to that and continue to then put themselves in a situation where they're going to continue to get hurt because they're not
Right.
necessarily building in those boundaries. So
Absolutely.
always
I
a
think I
balance.
think you hit it on the head when you said it's self-love, because honestly, when I made that, I'm such a loving person. My heart is huge. My love is big. And I wouldn't have had an issue with, him coming into my life. And if he was, consistent, me expressing that love for him, I wouldn't have had an issue with that at all. But I do feel like when I made that decision not to pursue it, that it was an act of self-love for sure. Like I really did feel that way. There wasn't a feeling of like ego or anything in that decision. I just knew that, Ash, is probably best not to, because I didn't like I said, I didn't really have a horrible life without him,
Right.
and I didn't want to create something where it could potentially be horrible because I created that space for him, or I gave him that space to continue to hurt me. So yeah, definitely an act of self-love.
Do you think that your soul is more advanced than his?
I do. I do. And I honestly I remember feeling that way when I forgave him,
Mm-hmm.
recently, well, last year when I forgave him, I really did feel like, wow, like I can't really be upset with him because he might not get it. He just might not get
Exactly.
it on a soul level, and that's fine, but it's also his lesson to learn. So yeah, I definitely do feel advanced.
It's interesting when you think about soul contracts, right? Like whether it's the parent-child relationship or a different type of relationship, we'll often think about how that person is showing up for us and what type of lesson we might need to be overcoming in that moment. But we also need to think about the flip side. And it could also be that maybe you were a catalyst for his own growth.
Right.
And
Right.
right, like it could appear on the surface level like, oh, Ashley's the one that has the lessons because she's growing up without the parent. But no, not necessarily. It could have been like, hey, he has the lessons, or maybe he had karma to balance or something. So
Right.
just something
Right.
else to think about too. You know, when you were sharing that you have a brother, right, on his side,
Yes.
is that
Mhm.
correct? And you talked about how when you realized that your father had behaved the same way to him, it helped you to understand, like, okay, it's not a me problem. I want to touch on this for a second because really, when our parents are not able to be the healthiest parents that we would want them to be, it has nothing to do with us.
Right.
It's a matter of them not being able to create their own safety. And so, really, that's what was happening, right? Your entire childhood, he was living in an ego led space and he was not able to create safety for himself. He wasn't able to understand his core wounds and to heal them and therefore to be present
Yeah.
with you. But it has nothing to do with you. Yet, meanwhile, most children or many grown adults with that wounded inner child would
Will
take it
blame
as
them. Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% agree. I feel like when it came to forgiving him, a lot of that was unlocked for me. Like I didn't have the tools to understand it before. But like I said, I'm so grateful for going through the academy with you, because had I not, I probably would have grown up, especially if he passed away without me forgiving him, I probably would have had a very negative look on it. Like, yeah, he deserved it,
Right.
like, he wasn't here for me and that's what he gets. But like, no, I really do feel like through that forgiveness, it really opened my eyes. And I did a personal like hypnosis on myself during that time when I was forgiving him. And a lot of that came up. Like, he just doesn't know, he doesn't get it. It's not his fault. Like, he really just, he hasn't grasped that on that level yet. And I've never really had the notion or the spirit to hate him, but I do remember like from like my high school experience, just being hurt, just being disappointed by his actions. And I remember, I don't know whose quote it was, but my mom used to tell me all the time, you don't hate him, you hate his actions. And I'm like, yeah, like I don't hate him. I hate his actions or his inaction in this case. So yeah, it's kind of always been that way with me. Like my mindset has always been that, but through forgiveness, through forgiving him and just realizing like, I really appreciate you not being in my life, because you showed me how I should show up for myself. And I was appreciative in that moment. I'm appreciative of it now, because it's like I could have, like I said, opened that space up to him and it could have caused more damage than good. So
Yeah. And what a profound thing for you and your mom to talk about around separating his behaviors from him. Because
yeah, for
imagine if we
sure.
could all do that, right? Like I remember when I was growing up and I used to always hear people say, people can't change. That is the biggest load of BS. Like I have changed. Thank
Right.
the world I am not still walking around the
So
same
many
woman that I
times.
was, right? Like, yes. And that is such a limiting belief. People can change. But I also want to say that with the air of caution, if we are listening to this right now and taking that back to maybe a relationship with someone that we're currently dealing with, or whether it's a parent or a different type of relationship, and they keep saying they're going to change and then they're not, that's something different, right? We want to be paying attention
Right.
to actions and not just words. But I love that you touch on that, because when we detach the behaviors or a person's thoughts or a person's feelings, like from that person, it helps us to realize like, hey, a good person can do unhealthy things,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
At the
And,
end of
and,
the
and
day,
it,
we're all
it kind of
souls.
translates to, like you said, all different types of relationships in my life. Just recently I had a split between me and one of my close friends, and it hurt so bad. I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, but in that moment, I was so upset with her, but I had to remind myself, like, I don't hate her. I just hate what she decided to do. And
Right.
it brings a lot of peace for me anyway. And it's not even, at first when my mom told me that, I felt kind of delusional, like, no, mom, I hate him.
Nope, you're wrong.
No, it's him for sure. But no, like now that I'm older, I get it. I get it now more than I did when I was younger. But yeah, it definitely helps with just any type of relationship, any type of connection that I have in my life, not just his, just, any type of situation that, I can detach this person from their actions. But of course, not being naive to believe that I'm, not being naive and delusional, like, oh no, it's not you, it's your actions. But then they continue to choose to do the same action.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
Then
more like, you
yes.
have to really read the patterns and try to figure this out. But yeah, definitely it comes from a space of peace for sure.
Absolutely. If you had to think about other people that are listening to this right now that might resonate, whether it was a physically absent parent or emotionally, whatever that case is, what advice would you give them for their own healing?
Um, that's a really good question. I would really I would dig deep. I would tell everyone to dig deep and to try to understand it from their point of view. Because you're only living this life through your perspective, but you don't know, and especially if you haven't had the conversation, you really don't know what they've gone through or what what type of mindset they have or their childhood experiences that lead
Yes.
them to, to believe that this is what they should do versus, not do. So I would try to see it from their perspective. I'm a very empathetic person. So I tend to do that just second nature. Like, I wonder why he did this, or, I wonder why they did this. So I would definitely ask those questions and really dig deep, even through like the pain and the hurt, dig deep to try to understand it, because it might be a situation that you haven't necessarily gone through. So you don't understand why they're taking this, action, this, route. But yeah, I would definitely try to be empathetic.
Yeah, for sure. I always try to think about that too in my own inner child healing and having compassion, right? Because I think that I resonate with a lot of what you're sharing, just on a different level. Like I said at the beginning, right? More the emotional. And I know from supporting so many women that this is a very common thing. Something that when I was early on in my healing journey, something that I really battled with is I knew what, the family cycle in my family had been. I knew that this was
Mm,
like a generational cycle over and over and over again.
you know,
And so I often would use that, but in the wrong way. I would allow it to then be an excuse, right? And I turned it into okay, well, I'm going to just continue to tolerate this because it's not their fault. Or, this
right,
was done to them, like they don't know any better. And it's so important to remember, like, hey, we can have compassion for someone and acknowledge where they are and accept them, because that is what our journey is all about, to accept people and situations as they are, but
right,
simultaneously say, if that person is not capable of change, then I have to release them. Like, I don't have to release them with anger or hatred. I can do what you
absolutely,
did. I can release with forgiveness, but I can still fully release and say, hey, we cannot exist in the same realities. I am sorry that you went through those things, right? And I love you for all of that, but you had your chance and I need to
right.
now move forward. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. So many women or people in general. So if you're a gentleman or, whatever, it applies to everyone. Um, but if you are struggling with that, just remember, like, at the end, your job is to always choose what is healthy. And so you can find forgiveness and have someone in your life if they are healthy and you
Yeah,
can continue to
definitely.
be healthy with that person. You can also find forgiveness and separate yourself from that person if they are not healthy and you are trying to
Yeah,
be healthy.
definitely setting boundaries and understanding.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. That's a tough one. I think for many people, they feel guilty then.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, I'm still working on boundaries just in general with life. But I think that once you come to learn and love yourself more, you'll understand what you can tolerate and what you can't. And you'll understand that you setting a boundary is, again, an act of self-love. And it'll be easier for you to sift through the people who are energy vampires and leeches
Yes.
compared to the people who actually do care about you and want to be, with you along your journey. So yeah, definitely setting boundaries and finding peace through that too, because like you said, you can easily be manipulated, especially if you're in that space of forgiveness or healing and you think that, okay, this person can change. If you haven't addressed those boundaries with them beforehand and they continue to do those things, you'd have to take accountability for that yourself if you haven't set those boundaries and made them clear to them too.
Absolutely. So, you know how much I love astrology. I used to talk about astrology every chance I had on our calls. And at the start, you said that you're an Aries moon, and I told
I
you I'm an
am.
Aries moon too. Okay. And one of my brothers is also an Aries moon. But when I try to tell him this stuff, he doesn't care because he calls me a moon woman and doesn't want to listen to my stuff. Sometimes he will, but usually, it comes with jokes. So for anyone who is also interested in astrology, from what I have read, and by the way, disclaimer, I am not an astrologist. I am just an enthusiast.
Yes.
So I want to preface that.
Same.
But they say that when you have an Aries moon, because the moon can represent the home as well.
Emotions.
Yes, when you have an
Mhm.
Aries moon, it usually signifies that you had a distant parent. And it can be a
Really?
physically or an emotionally distant parent.
That's crazy. I never knew
Yes.
that. I
Yes, yes,
never
yes.
knew that.
So for anyone who's interested in that, you can go to AstroSeek is the site that I usually use, and you can look up what your moon sign is and then just do a simple Google search and it'll tell you about that. But yeah, and if anyone else listening to this is an Aries moon, comment below this podcast episode and let Ashley and I know. Is that similar for you? If you are an Aries moon, do you also resonate with our conversation from today? I know both of my boys, Ashley, both of them are Capricorn moons. Like, come on.
Really?
And I'm like, well, damn it. I'm the only parent that they both share. So I know that this is linked to me somehow. And so, and sure enough, it's about having a parent that can be too hard on you. And, that is,
Oh,
so I always try to use astrology and like filter, and learn my own
yeah,
lessons
definitely.
so that my children aren't one day on a podcast talking about all the trauma that I gave them. So if anyone ever finds one of those out and in public, please let me know.
That's so funny.
Right? Oh gosh, because none of us are perfect as parents either. Oh, awesome. So Ashley, do you mind just sharing with, our listeners how they can best get a hold of you if they want to connect with you, learn a little bit more about you?
Absolutely. So I'm very active on Instagram. My Instagram page is Took the Healer, and it's spelled TOUK, the Healer. It's all one word, of course. But there you could, I like to post a lot of tarot readings, a lot of like timeline breathing exercises and resets just for the timeline in general. I would like people to scroll and to come across my page and like, okay, let me take a deep breath. But also if you are interested in tarot reading or an energy healing, you can definitely DM me on my Instagram page and we can go from there for sure.
Amazing. And I'm also going to put your Instagram handle, and for everyone that's listening, I will have Ashley's information in the description box under this episode. So make sure you look below and then it'll all easily be there for you too. And definitely comment and let us know what was coming up for you as you were listening to this discussion today. And Ashley, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
being
Crystal. This was
here.
amazing. This was amazing.
We could have taken this like down 90 other rabbit holes.
Yes.
So we'll do this again.
For sure, for sure. Maybe
And
we'll have like a part two, part three,
I
part
know,
four.
right? A 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you here today. And for all of the listeners, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Let us know how you're feeling, and I will see you again soon.